What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Chris, this is 4K Motoring, and today we're going to be working on our 2021 Yamaha MT-03. This is going to be a pretty simple upgrade, but I think a pretty meaningful one, something you guys can do at home, and I'm going to walk you through it. So for those of you that have been following along on this channel for a little while, you'll know that we picked up this 2021 MT-03 a couple months ago as the girlfriend was starting to ride, learning how to ride, just a basic beginner bike. This thing has been phenomenal for that purpose. The throttle is very forgiving. It's not going to get away from you. It's not going to do anything super scary. It is very nimble, very agile as far as the geometry of the bike and the weight of the bike. Handles really well. Brakes pretty well. It has ABS, so you don't lock up brakes. Really, this is a great confidence-inspiring bike. That way a new rider doesn't get scared away from riding and wants to learn basic skills and continue their riding career. This thing has been phenomenal for that. Obviously, it's pretty limited in displacement. While it will, in theory, run maybe a maximum close to 100 miles an hour downhill with a tailwind, it's going to take 3 business days to get there. So it's not really ideal for a long-term bike cruising on the interstate at 80 miles an hour or so, which is pretty commonplace in North Carolina. It is pretty difficult on this thing, especially no wind protection and just winding this thing all the way out in top gear. It is pretty exhausting and pretty fatiguing and not something I'd really recommend or not something this bike likes. So because of that, it's not going to be something that we're going to keep for very long. That's why I always say, for those of you that are getting into motorcycles or buying a first motorcycle, don't buy a new one. You're going to lose so much money on it. Buy used, especially if you can get a gently used new bike. And that way you can sell it for almost what you paid, if not more than what you paid. And it's just a fun little hobby. It's like a savings account you can play with. What we're doing today specifically is doing some lever replacement. Now, there is a lot of cost-cutting measures on this bike. Surprise, surprise, it's a 300 class beginner bike. There are a lot of corners cut to make this very affordable and very approachable from many angles, including financially. As I showed you guys on one of my shorts recently, I wasn't happy with the slop of this throttle cable. It wiggled a lot. You can tell it was putting tension on the cable, but man, it moved a lot. And I found that was because the actual throttle tubes down here were just kind of wiggling back and forth, and the little bit of tension you put in the throttle, in the twist of the throttle, was just moving these cables up and down, not really doing anything to pull the fuel injection down below. So what I ended up doing, what tightened it up a lot, this is about all the free play I have in it now. Just a very little wiggle. Any more than that and we're starting to open the throttle. I did that by simply using a couple zip ties and keeping these cables just fastened together. That way they didn't splay apart and have to move back and forth. You weren't worried about wiggling these cables. They're very static now, so every bit that you're pulling is actually pulling the cable in the sleeve, and the throttle response is so much more predictable, makes it much easier to ride. With that predictability, these factory levers, which are fine, there's nothing technically wrong with them, are very cheap. There's not a whole lot of adjustability to them. They're one size fits all, and the profile, while it's pretty commonplace, I don't really care for. Because of the one size fits all stuff, we're going to go ahead and replace them. We have a set from Amazon that was relatively inexpensive. I'll leave a link in the description below if you're interested in those. It is similar in appearance to the ASV levers, something like I use on the Ducati or the higher end bikes. These levers here are fantastic, infinitely adjustable, have a great warranty, and are just really robust. These aren't those, but they do look pretty similar. Quite simply, all you're going to need for this job could be 2 10mm wrenches, a 10mm ratchet, and a 10mm wrench. You've got a 10mm bolt on top here that goes all the way through, it's threaded all the way through, and you've got a 10mm retainer nut on the bottom. Retainer nut has to come off, and then you can back this screw out pretty easily. And that gives us our new lever. Before you put the new one on, a little bit of grease can be applied just to make sure it hinges just fine, but otherwise it's pretty accessible. I really do like the feel of it. It's got this flat front profile here. It is adjustable as little as that much, which is a little almost too close, but that makes it good for very short fingers. Can go all the way out to beyond what the factory one was. So really this gives this bike a range of adjustment that you just didn't get with the factory levers. Now moving to the clutch side only gets a little bit more complicated. We now have a clutch cable that is connected to it. We can see that there. That we're going to have to basically have enough slack to slide that out. What I'd recommend on just this fine adjuster here, go ahead and adjust this in just to give this enough slack. Let this lever bounce around as much as possible before you do this job. That way we can at least have enough slack to get this lever off without pulling anything or without causing a lot of headache for us. This is going to be a similar process. There's no nut on top. There is just one on the bottom. It is harder to get to. We'll just remove that and we should be able to pull this pin out of there. All right, the clutch is a whole lot easier. There is no nut on the top here, no threading needed. It's just that bolt on the bottom, a 10mm, and this pin will slide right out. When we do that, you can see all the grease in here. This is going to be something that moves around a lot. There's a little sleeve right inside that we're going to have to press out, and we're going to transfer that to our new clutch lever. So pretty easily we were able to get both of these on. We got our clutch on there. Remember when we put that clutch in there, we've got to get our actual clutch end, the wire, through the basket here on an angle and twist it back. It locks in place so that's not coming out. Then we retension the cable to make sure we have just a little bit of slack, not a whole lot. And then once we make sure we get the new bushing inside greased up, there was a little O-ring that went on the bottom inside, just below the bushing. This whole lever slides in, the pin drops through, and that 10mm bolt can get threaded on. Make sure you set it to a point where you can still reach it, but make sure when it gets pulled back, it still disengages fully, and you're not in a point where the bike keeps pulling even when you don't want it to. Overall, I really am pretty happy with these levers. They look great on the bike. They match it pretty well. They are CNC machined, so overall, I think they're going to be pretty strong. They kind of wobble a little bit, but they look like they're pretty well retained, so that may be something we have to tighten up in the future. Overall, I think they look great. I think they look pretty strong. They have a nice face to them, and their adjustability makes them perfect for a bike like this. Again, pretty inexpensive on Amazon. I'm finding it hard not to recommend these things right now. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys are running different levers on your bikes, let me know. Again, for the higher end bikes, I do love the ASV levers. I've been a big fan of those for years and they have never steered me wrong. For these smaller bikes, the cheaper bikes, the ones that you don't keep quite as long, I usually haven't spent that kind of money on them. But for something inexpensive like this, that really adds a lot of functionality and a little bit better looks, I think that's a win. I know you guys haven't seen a whole lot of this bike on the channel just yet. Just wait, come spring, there'll be a lot more with this thing. We will probably be looking to upgrade around summertime, but at least around springtime, you'll see a lot more of this bike, and I'll really share my thoughts over our course of ownership with it and all the basic stuff you really need to look at with one of these MT-03s. If you guys have any questions or if you guys have done any similar modifications or other useful modifications, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, stay tuned. We'll be back next time.